When you download the sketch for today, this is what it looks like. It's just a basic thumbnail rough sketch that you can work from. Everything that we're going to do is going to be done in Photoshop. Let's fire that up. The first thing you'll need to do is set up your document. Since we want to print this off, I'm going to keep the size of it 8 wide by 10 tall. The color mode I'm going to work in is RGB. RGB for doing digital illustrations tends to be the best mode to work in. This is because it'll give you a wide range of colors. Plus, when you start playing around with your blending modes or trying to change up things with your layers, RGB will give you a better type of result. High resolution, high enough to be able to print. Don't worry about the background for now. Say okay. This is what we got. Go into full screen mode. The first thing we need to do is to paint the background. In doing this, I want to show you the techniques that you can do with your paintbrushes to give you more than just a solid background. To start off, I don't want to use a white background. Let's give ourselves just a primary solid color. I'm going to start off with orange. I've got my fill bucket. One click fills it in with this. But rather than even working with a solid color, I want to give it kind of a texture, more of a cloud-like kind of look. This is where our paintbrush comes in. And with your brush selected, you know at the very top you've got your brush options, changing the size of it. You've even got some different kinds of brushes that you can pull down and use. These are the default brushes that come on there just by default when you first load it up. If you want more brushes, even ones that come with Photoshop not by defaults, if you go to the very top, here's a listing of different other kinds of brushes that you can have. These are more of the texture brushes, so if I wanted, say, calligraphic brushes. When I choose it, it's going to ask me, do I want to add it or append it? If you append, it'll just add it to the very bottom of it. If you just said OK, then it will replace all of those there. Let's do some other ones. Faux finish brushes. Let's do natural brushes. Append it. And you can see now I've got some different kinds of effect. The basic default brush is simply round. Whoop, let's choose another color. It will look like this. The other kind of brushes give you a bit more textured look and feel. Which, if that's the idea that you're going with, actually works really well. If I click and drag, however, you can see how it creates a different kind of look. Some of them are better for just blotting, so just clicking several times. Some are better for swiping along through it. Whenever you choose a brush, the second thing to pay attention to is the opacity of it. You don't always have to work at 100% of whatever color you're working with. If you drop the opacity, say down to 25%, you can actually build up layers of color, and so you get more of a watercolor kind of effect and feel. This will come in handy when we start adding shadows and highlights to our illustration. Usually whenever I do a digital illustration, I start off with just solid colors, then I'll go on top of it with the details, and I'll do that in a lower type of opacity. And we're also going to play around with the layers in order to do that. So let's fill back in my background and actually work through and see what we can do to make this look a little bit more textured. Fill it in with there, grab my paintbrush. If I want it to look cloudy, I could use a default brush. As far as the size of it, we'll make it pretty large, that's good. And we'll make it a very soft edge brush, so the hardness is down to 0. I'm asking you in the instructions to choose an analogous color. What do I mean by analogous? What are analogous colors on the color wheel? Adjacent to each other. So if I've got orange, it's a color that's close to orange. It's got red, it's got a little bit of yellow to it, but it definitely doesn't have something on the opposite side of the color wheel like blue or green. It's just analogous. The other thing is, think about lights and darks. Remember, whenever you choose colors, you don't just want to have one single color of it. You want to have slightly lighter, slightly darker. Okay, very quickly you can see I've filled it in. More of a clouded kind of background. You can spend more time on this as well. Let's load up our picture. I've given you the sketch. There it is. I'm going to drag it into here. And since we're making a card, I'm going to scale this down so it can fit towards the top and leave some room either at the bottom or somewhere else on there to place some text. The sketch is in a layer by itself. Since the file was named sketch, the layer automatically was named that. I'm going to drop the opacity of this so I can see both it and the background as well. I'm going to be drawing on top of this and refining the sketch. So the next layer is refine sketch. This is on one layer. Above it, I want a new layer. Double click on that. I'm going to call it outlines or refine sketch, whatever you want. Here's the fun part. So with the outlines, I'm going to choose black as my fill color. And I'm going to use another kind of brush. Instead of using just a round brush, let's make a very hard edge round brush, nice and small. If I was to click now, that's kind of thick. Let's also bring up our opacity 100%. A little bit smaller. I can make it calligraphic by choosing here and shrinking it down. Just as if you've got a writing nib that's long and narrow, this will give me a paintbrush that's now long and narrow. And so when I paint, I get this ribbon kind of style. Also from there, you can choose the angle at which you're working with. So there's, oh, come on, and make it a little bit more narrow. Different angle, different size. You can bring this down. Whoa, too large. Your brushes can get extremely big if you get them out of control. From here, I'll zoom in a bit. Now all I'm going to do is retrace the lines. Pay attention to the details of this. She's got wings, hair, face, heart. She's wearing a dress. Since I'm doing this with my drawing pad, some of my lines are going to look very jagged. That's okay. Change up the width and size of your brush. If I'm doing hair, maybe I want the hair to be slightly smaller lines to work with. Or the outer edge of the hair can have larger lines. Change up the direction of your brush. Basically, I'm going through and refining my sketch. If I don't like the way something looks, grab your eraser, erase it away, and redraw it. It doesn't have to be anything difficult. Okay, I won't make you all watch me redo the whole thing. I've actually worked that step ahead. And so here's my refined sketch that I have. Let's get rid of lines. So I've got my background, I've got my sketch, and when you're finished, you should have an outline that looks something like this. It's just a basic outline of everything that's there. Now comes the fun part, actually filling in the different colors that I'm working with. Notice I've turned off visibility for the sketch layer. I need to have a new layer that's underneath my outlines, my refined sketch. So make a new one. And this one I'm going to call, what do we call it? Block colors. With this one, grab my paintbrush again. We'll reset it back to kind of a default round brush. And we'll make it a hard edge brush. I'm going to keep my opacity at 100%, but now I'm just going to go in and I'm going to block in large, solid bits of color. So if her wing was white, I would grab a white, and I can paint in white on this one. Since I'm working on a layer that's underneath all of my other layers, or excuse me, my outline layer, the outlines are going to always stay on top. My background will stay in the background. And if you get a larger brush, you can go a lot faster. Go outside the edge a little bit, grab your eraser. You can either erase it away or choose another color and finish it up. Let's see, we can do the heart. Could do the dress. If you wanted a faster way of doing everything to fill it in, go around the outlines of your area. Say I wanted to fill this in with just that. Then you can grab your fill bucket. At the very top, if I turn on continuous, but make sure all layers is unchecked, I'm still working on this block layer. I can fill in that particular area in one click. So in other words, I filled in the outlines and I clicked right there. If I tried doing that elsewhere, it's just going to fill in the whole thing, which is not what I want. For this one, it may actually be easier to paint in exactly where you want it to go. Dun, 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 dun. Brown hair, purple hair, or blue hair. Let's go browner. There we go. Another common mistake is students will accidentally choose the wrong layer and start painting on it. Instead of having block colors selected, they'll have their outlines selected. And they won't realize it until it's too late. If you ever want to accidentally or keep yourself from accidentally painting on the wrong layer, you can select a layer. Up here is a way of locking it down. One of the options is to lock down any type of painting. So if I chose that one, you can see the little lock is on there. Now it's actually preventing me from painting on that layer. I could move it around, or I can lock it down completely. I can choose this layer, and then I have no problems whatsoever. As with the other one, I'm not going to make y'all watch me do the whole thing. I've done it ahead of time. But I'm blocking in on one layer by itself all of the appropriate colors for this one. Once this is done, once you got everything, this is how it should look. Here's step 3. I've blocked in everything on its own layer. If I turn off the sketch, there she is right there. Now it's time for the fun part, all the details, adding icing to everything that's here. As far as the details go, I'm going to paint on top of the layers that I have here. So let's zoom in. Maybe I'll do it for the wing. On top of the block layer, make a new one. If you want to give it a name, you can call it shadows and highlights, call it details. But on this layer, I'm going to choose one of my other kinds of brushes. These will give me a little bit more texture to play around with. For instance, this one. If I wanted to add shadow to the wings, choose a gray or more of a bluish kind of gray. I'm going to drop my opacity down. I like to work around 20%. And then slowly I'm going to build up underneath here. It looks painterly. It's because it is a painting. The other thing you can do, if you don't want to have these hard edge lines, if I wanted to pick up more of the texture of this brush, this icon right here will open up your brush options. More than just changing the size of it or the hardness of it, you can change other aspects of that brush. One of the things is the spacing. If I increase the spacing, you can see in the preview what it looks like. It's actually going to space out how close or far that brush pattern is. So if I brought it together, Now if I made a brush line, you can see how it's kind of building up. Still doesn't look 100% perfect. Here's another thing we can do. Choose shape dynamics. With this one, I can cause some jitter to it. I can get it to be slightly smaller or larger. If I increase it, you can kind of get an idea of it. Let's see. So now, some are slightly smaller, some are larger. Let's change the angle of it. There we go. Now it's going to look really cool. Some of them are now going off at different angles because I've changed the shape of it. Let's undo. Let's erase away this. Much better. Now I'm getting that blotchy kind of feel. It looks like it's almost a pastel rough kind of thing. Working in a low opacity to build it up. All I'm doing is adding shadow to that area. Accidentally gotten off there, that's okay. Other kinds of things that you can do, scattering. When I check it off, I can have them go off course a little bit. I can increase the amount of scattering, so if I wanted more of them on here, all within the same brush. You can play around with color dynamics. I usually don't get into these. I like to know what color I'm working with, but I can mix the foreground and background. So in this case, I've got blue and white. I can do a little bit of mixing, there we go, of the foreground and background. And I get a little bit lighter and darker. Or, instead of maybe a white, let's do a dark blue or dark purple. So now it's going to introduce a little bit of the background color. Don't go away. I'm having fun. Into there. Let's see if I wanted to do her hair. Pick up some of the brown. Let's go a little bit lighter. And we'll turn off my color. Add highlights to the hair.
Should we use the same texture throughout the whole?
Nope, you can change it up. If I wanted to do this to another brush, yeah, let's choose one of these style brushes down here. When I select it, you can see here's the default brush. Let's change the size. If I just clicked and drug, it gives me that kind of effect. But you can see the brush itself is kind of speckledy. So if I wanted to show off the speckledy, I can change up the spacing of it. I can change up the shape, maybe some larger and smaller. I can turn on scattering. Maybe increase the count. And now I've got a brush that looks more like this. It's covering a large area. Let's add some shadows to there. I'd highly encourage you to play around with the brushes. This really is a lot of fun. If you're not used to doing painting in real life, and you want the option to be able to undo your work, digital painting is a good stepping stone into creating. I know I'm going very quick, so I'm not going to add a lot of details to it. I'll show you my final rendering and how I did that. Let's get a little bit darker, maybe some blues. If I zoom out, pretty cool. It's actually adding a little bit painterly texture. Adding shadows and highlights to each part of this particular illustration. Here's what my final looked like. Going back to what you saw previously. I'll turn off my text layer for now. You can see in all my layers, I actually started adding more layers to different things, covering up certain parts. So there's the layers just for her shadows. Oops. On layer 1. There's of course my refined sketch. Hey, if I turned off the sketch, that's what it looks like without that. So the outline kind of covers up a lot of the mistakes. There's a layer just for highlights. Here's my shadows layer. Of course, here's my solid color. Hey, if I turn off the solid color, that's kind of cool. But you can see where I've gone in and painted exactly where I want it to be. Changed up my background, everything else. Let's see, we'll turn everything back on. The last thing I want you to do, since this is a Valentine's Day card that we're creating, find some sort of quote. You can make up a quote, you can add a poem, something to add to the very bottom of it. I found this one by, what was his name? Abraham Cowley. I do not know who he is, but I liked it's more or less talking about unrequited love, love that you don't get in return. But find some sort of quote that you can add to the bottom of it, turn it into a Valentine's Day card. You can play around with the design and layout of the wording. You can play around with the way the words interact with your background. All I did was change my blending mode to get that kind of effect. And when you're finished, you may print it off on the color printer. I do have some cardstock, so this would be the kind of thing you can turn into an actual Valentine's Day card. When you upload it to Moodle, I want you to flatten it so that you can save it as a JPEG. If you don't remember how to flatten all of your layers, first of all, I'm going to save this now as my Photoshop file. You can go to Layer, down to Flatten Image. It's going to say, do you want to discard them? We'll say OK. Now I've got a single solid layer, and I can save it as a JPEG. That JPEG is what you're going to upload to Moodle once you get finished as well. All cool? Okay, so this is our simple exercise for today. As you're working on this, I'm going to walk around, and if you have your homework, all of your image research that you have for your own illustration, that's what I want to see.